Just like any startup, once you're looking for like the right product to market fit, you test a lot of things. You do some market research, you do some customer validation, and at the end of the day, you see what fits and what doesn't to your specific market. So that's what we're actually doing right now with the next presentation. So as you know, Ravi is coming up on stage, and his talk was supposed to focus on accelerators. Is that right? That's right. But what happened, we figured since a lot of you are like students in the very early stage, you might as well hear something that's like hot, to call it that way. So instead of focusing on accelerators that probably just a few of you really like are interested in, so you can grab him afterwards, we're going to switch his talk to something even better. And his talk is going to be called Building a $1 Billion Venture. So Ravi, please come on stage.
Thank you, Andres.
You're welcome.
How much time do we have?
You have a lot of time, no more than 30 minutes.
30 minutes, OK. Well, because we can talk about whatever we want to talk about today. But this is really a just-in-time switch of a presentation. So hopefully this will be fun. First of all, thank you. And Labos, I'm Ravi. It's good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Andres. I'm honored to be here. I'm here because I sincerely believe that in this room lies the next big company. And if I can help catalyze that or drive that, it's a true honor and pleasure. And from what I've seen of Lithuania today, I think that Lithuania has a history of disrupting the United States. Lithuania has become a force in basketball, which is a traditional American domain that Lithuania is now disrupting. And I hope that, and I think that Lithuania will do the same when it comes to startups. In fact, my real aspiration is not that Lithuania matches Silicon Valley, but really that you leapfrog us, that you disrupt us, and that you exploit the advantages that are here. And so, because this is Lithuania, what I was telling Andres is that we could have had a presentation on accelerators, but I thought we should make the presentation a bit bolder and really talk about building billion-dollar businesses. Not just million-dollar businesses, but we're going to go for the big billion. And we can talk about accelerators as well. So if we have time, we'll weave that in as well. But I wanted to try this out. But please forgive me, because I literally just switched the presentation based on the demographics of who is here in the crowd. OK? All right. So what we're going to talk about today is building billion-dollar ventures. Quickly, I do run an accelerator that's called Alchemist. And you can go to the site there. Damien's company, Wise, was a graduate of Alchemist. And we are a venture-backed accelerator. We're backed by Draper Fisher Jurvetson and Khosla Ventures and Cisco and Salesforce and a bunch of people. And we just focus on enterprise startups. We give $28,000, and you come to the Bay Area for 6 months, and over 2/3 of our companies end up raising capital, and the average raise is about $2 million. We can talk more about accelerators and what they do, but you can go to the site and learn a lot, and if you want to, if we have time, we'll talk more about that. OK? So let's get started. So let me tell you about who I am. So in my past life, I used to work at DFJ. Draper Fisher Jurvetson is the venture capital fund that funded, in Emily's presentation, you saw Elon Musk. So DFJ was the company that funded SpaceX and Tesla. And I was actually there in the venture capital room when Elon Musk was going bankrupt, and we had to make the decision about do we fund him or not. DFJ also funded companies like Skype out of Estonia and Baidu out of China. And so I worked at DFJ for 6 years, and before that, I worked at 2 startups that were Kleiner Perkins-backed enterprise startups, and I also worked at McKinsey, which is a consulting company. Today, what I do is I teach at Stanford, and all of our lectures at Stanford you can check out online at etl.stanford.edu, and you're welcome. We broadcast everything publicly. I run Alchemist, which is the accelerator that I talked about, which is a venture-backed accelerator. And then we also have fellowships and jobs for Alchemist. And if you're interested, you can go to the site and check those out. OK? And these are some companies that I backed from the very beginning that have become what I'll tell you are billion-dollar companies, what we call unicorn companies. So I led Draper's investment in Twitch, which got acquired by Amazon for $970 million. And then I also led the first investment in Pubmatic. We funded Pubmatic at a $4 million valuation. It was the first institutional round. And Pubmatic is now a big company that will hopefully go public soon and be a good company. Okay? I just mentioned that because these are my experiences with having backed companies at the very beginning that have now grown and become very sizable concerns. All right. So now we're going to talk about building a billion-dollar business. And you don't need to build a billion-dollar business. It is more important for you to pursue what you love and what you're passionate about. But this is going to be just a short excursion to say, if you were to go down the path of building a billion-dollar business, how do you do it? And the key insight here is that you don't have to work 1,000 times harder to get 1,000 times bigger return. In terms of going from $1 million to $1 billion. The key thing is understanding the physics of how to build a billion-dollar business. And the analogy from Archimedes is, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I can move the world. And similarly, when you're building a billion-dollar business, your key advantage, your key strength lies in architecting the business so that it will not grow linearly, but exponentially. And that's basically the main thing that I want to talk about for the next 20 minutes or however much time I have, is how do you structure businesses that will naturally build upon themselves in an exponential way. And if you do that, it's not necessarily more work. It's just architected to become big. Okay? We call these unicorns. I don't know why they use the word unicorns, because unicorns implies a fictitious animal. And these are not fictitious. And I think it's actually dangerous to think that they're fictitious. You have it in your capability to build a billion-dollar business. Okay? And I hope you do. But in the Valley, the term that they use for these is unicorns. And here are all the unicorns. Here are all the billion-dollar venture-backed businesses that have been created in the last 10 years. The green ones are consumer companies, and the black ones are enterprise or B2B companies. Okay? There's been about 40. And you can see that Facebook was obviously the big winner. But all these others are very significant companies. If you look at the number of billion-dollar businesses, and this comes out of Eileen Lee's work from Cowboy Ventures, there's roughly 4 per year that are created. And so your challenge is that if you look at the ecosystem of accelerators and how many companies get started from accelerators every year, there's around, I think it's 3,500, and about 1/7 of those get venture-backed. Your challenge is to be one of those 4. One of the 4 companies this year that will become worth $1 billion. Okay? And so this is going to be a talk on some principles to think about. I call it going from 0 to hero. And really what this is about is it's about walking exponentially versus linearly. When I say that, if I walk linearly, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's linear. It's a linear progression with just an incremental unit every step. Exponentially is just 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Okay, in the same incremental space, I have a sizable outcome, and it's just because each increment is growing at a different pace. Does that make sense? So if you look at exponential curves, this is the growth of the internet. And it's mapped on a logarithmic scale. And it looks pretty linear. It looks relatively calm. So if I showed you this graph, this is from 1966 to 2001. And if you're looking at that graph, it doesn't look like anything terribly disruptive is happening. The internet is just growing, at a nice, simple, linear scale on this graph. But it's posed on a logarithmic scale. If I put it on a linear scale, it looks like this. Okay? So it's the exact same data points, just put now where the y-axis is linear, and suddenly it looks like something crazy is happening between 1990 and 2000. Do you see that? It looks like everything's going relatively slowly, and then whoa, from 1990, you're like, the world's crazy. This internet thing is exploding. But the reality is that the internet was just growing at a constant dynamic. It just happened to be exponential. And when we feel that externally, especially because we experience things linearly as biological beings, it feels crazy. Does that make sense? So, whoa. How did I? Okay. So, if you were tasked with trying to grow to $1 billion in 5 years, and if you were growing at a constant exponential rate, what that would mean is that you would have to quadruple whatever the driver of value was every year. Does that make sense? So if you grow 4x, assuming that we're starting at $1 million valuation, you would have to grow by 4x year over year for 5 years to hit $1 billion. If you're growing at roughly, what is it, 3x, it's 7 years, and 2x, it's 10 years, okay? Just to give you some metrics. Now, 4x growth might sound really difficult, but growing by 4x or growing by 300% year over year just means that you're growing 12% month over month, just to make it more manageable, which is about 3% week over week. It's not too bad. And if you look at some of the companies like Yammer, where Alchemist, the accelerator that I run, is housed out of San Francisco, they went from being founded to getting acquired by Microsoft for $1.2 billion in 4 years. Okay, their growth rate was about, not only, but it was about 3% week over week. Okay, which that might sound difficult, but it's not related to hiring tons of people. It's really they architected their product in a certain way after tuning that machine where it would just naturally by itself grow 3% week over week, which ended up meaning that they were quadrupling year over year, which ended up meaning that they got acquired for $1.2 billion in 4 years. Does that make sense? But it started with that simple premise of just how do I grow by 3%? How do I go from 100 to 103 people week over week? And just growing by that same constant rate inevitably created something that emergently grew to $1 billion. Okay? If you do this linearly, you won't get there. Okay? And so these are just different curves. We're aiming for exponential. Y equals 2 to the x. Okay? So how do you create drivers for exponential growth? And we're just going to go through 3 today for the sake of time. Just 3 principles that I wanted to go over of things to just bake in as you're starting to think about starting these ventures. And these are simple things that I think if you get them right, they can make dramatic differences. Okay. The first is your business model. And within your business model, we're talking margins. Okay. Does everybody know what gross margins are? Gross margins is the term for the incremental profit that you make from a sale. So if I am selling Akvil, is this Akvil? Is that how I say this? Okay, Akvil, no, okay, pretty good, okay. So Akvil, I might, if I sell Akvil for $1 or a liter, and it costs me 50 cents or half a liter to make it, my gross margin, my profit is 50 cents. Does that make sense? So let's say it costs me 50 cents for this liter, and I sell it for $1. I just made 50 cents. What does that mean? That means that I can sell another Akvil for 50 cents, for $1, sorry, and make another 50 cents. So if every year I'm able to sell one of these, I make enough profit if my margin is 50% to produce one more for the next year and sell that one more for $1, and I get another 50 cents to sell another one that next year. But at 50%, I'm just selling one a year. Does that make sense? Because I make just enough money to produce one more unit. Okay? If I can up that margin, that contribution from 50%, so at 50%, I'm growing at 0%. It's flat line linear. Okay? 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. If I just grow that margin to 67%, which means that if I can sell this either at a higher price point, if I can sell this for $1.50 or 1.5 latvas, if I go to Mojo or wherever that lounge is, right, and I charge more, or if I can reduce my costs and sell this for 33 cents, then suddenly I sell one of these and I make enough margin to be able to produce 2 more. Does that make sense? And then I sell 2 of those and I make enough margin to be able to sell 4. And then I sell 4 and I make enough margin to sell 8. So suddenly now I'm on a 2x growth curve just by shifting the margin, okay? As the margin grows up, my growth grows asymptotically. So if I get to 75%, just from 67 to 75%, 8 more percentage points of margin, I'm growing by 3x, okay? Just by that slight small difference in the business model, I'm able to optimize this, okay? So the first lesson is go after businesses which are high margin businesses. This is why venture capitalists love to fund software. Software is basically 90% margins, if not more. The beautiful thing about creating something like what Damien is creating is that you need to pay Damien and get his genius into a piece of software, but then you can sell it, and there's no cost for every incremental user, okay? And it holds the promise then of these high margin, very cash efficient businesses. Does that make sense? Okay. The next driver that we're going to talk about that grows exponentially is technology. And we're going to talk about technology is unique versus other businesses because it has an inherent positive feedback loop. The very things that are used to develop the next generation of technology are improved by the next generation of technology. So when you improve a chip, you actually improve the things that make that chip, and it compounds upon itself. That manifests in what's called Moore's Law. Okay, do you guys know about Moore's Law? So Moore's Law is this notion that the density of transistors in a chip doubles roughly every 18 months for the same price point, which just means that for the same amount of money, you have twice as much capability in any logic device, okay? And this has happened historically over time. So this is a graph of Moore's Law going back to 1900, or again, plotting it on a logarithmic scale, and so it's basically it seems very linear. But from 1900 to 2000, it's followed this very predictable path, okay? And it applies in almost any technology paradigm that you look at will follow this graph. So this is magnetic data storage, which is doubling every 18 months. This is the internet that has grown since 1966. This is the graph that we showed before. And this is how it feels when you graph it linearly. It feels like you're going through this dramatic change the world moment. But the reality is that the technology has been just growing organically on its own. And if you'll notice, it's immune to economic cycles. You know, if you're looking at this graph and I said, where was the Great Depression? You couldn't pinpoint it. It's not as if the technology is growing at a rate to fulfill the demand. It's not as if the technology is growing in a way to sort of fulfill an external forcing function on it. It's just growing emergently on itself. And it's immune to the economy. It's immune to demand. It just grows. And the reason why that's so beautiful is that it poses a real opportunity for disruption if you're building a company on a new technology paradigm. Okay? So the second thing then is to find a big market and a new technology and build a company which is a new technology for a new market. Does that make sense? So this is the, you know, on Emily's speech where you start once you have the why and then you're going after the what and the how. The what and the how, some things to consider are the what should be a big market, a big billion-dollar market that is just really, really has a lot of cash. And the how is with a new technology, okay? So Damien is changing customer management really through machine learning. Machine learning is the new paradigm that he's applying against an old industry, which is ripe for disruption. And he can kill that industry because he's riding an exponential curve. So anything mobile, anything cloud, anything drones, anything IoT, any type of market that you can go after, which is riding a technology curve that will get exponentially more powerful, poses a huge opportunity for you to disrupt. Because if you're on that wave, on that curve, it's very difficult for an incumbent to disrupt you. And before you know it, that curve, that platform, will be growing at a rate that's exponential. This is why the iPhone, has been such a phenomenal force, bigger than anybody anticipated. Does that make sense? I'm not going to talk about this. Okay. This is also why you have a big advantage for being students, okay? Because you are not tainted by history. So the beautiful thing about being an entrepreneur is that human beings physically, the way that we're built, we naturally project linearly into the future, okay? Because we extrapolate from the past using space-time dynamics that we're constrained by based on our chemistry, and we will extrapolate into what the future will look like based upon how the past has occurred. But the reality is that the path that technology curves exist on are naturally exponential, not linear. And so we have a tendency to grossly underestimate how fundamentally the world will change in the long term, okay? And we've seen these already. And even Moore's law is accelerating. So what all this means is, just to give you a sense, and this is Kurzweil's work, that if the curves continue, as they have historically for the last 100 years, if they continue at the same pace, just the same pace today, they don't accelerate, we achieve the capability of one human brain for $1,000 in 9 years. In the year 2023, you can do what a human brain can do for $1,000. In 2037, you can do what a human brain can do for a penny, okay? In 2049, you can do what the whole human race can do for $1,000. And in 2059, you can do what the whole human race can do for a penny, okay? It's mind-boggling, and the opportunities are immense if you leverage a technology paradigm to go after a big market, okay? And it gets better and better with time. And this is also why what's so fun about being a startup entrepreneur today is that you need less cash to do what you needed to do 10 years ago, for all the reasons that we talked about with Moore's law. Literally $50,000 today does what $5 million did 10 years ago, which is why I exist, which is why Accelerators exist today, because you can join Alchemist or another accelerator platform, and we give you the cash to get started, and in 6 months you can do phenomenal things. And the biggest companies now they're getting revenue. The top performing companies today, their revenue ramps are 4 times quicker than they were 10 years ago. So if you look at the top performing companies today and how long it took them to get to $100 million in revenue, it's 4 times as quick today as it was 10 years ago. It's a beautiful time to be a student. It's a beautiful time to start and disrupt. The final thing that we'll talk about is network effects, okay? And what a network effect means is that the technology that you guys do, or the initial market that you go after, you're going to win your initial customers based on some short-term competitive advantage, okay? You're going to win your initial customers as Instagram because you just developed a really cool way to take pictures on your phone, and it's cooler than any other app. But the way that you're going to sustain that advantage, the way that you're going to have value over the long term, is typically through a network effect. And a network effect is generally, loosely, sort of independent of the technology. The network effect is an advantage that accrues by virtue of the number of people that are using the product itself. So a network effect exists when the value of the product increases based on every incremental user that joins. Does that make sense? So a classic example from the Baltics is Skype, right? So if I created Skype today and I called it MIPE, and I said, okay, everybody, I have this great startup. It's called MIPE. it works identically as good as Skype. It's identical to Skype. No one here will use MIPE, not because the technology is better on Skype, but because everybody's using Skype. So Skype has a built-in network effect, which creates a moat over time that creates defense. There's typically 3 types of network effects. You can have a network effect which is a communication-driven network effect, like Skype, where before Skype existed, I would call you and say, this is the last call I'm going to make to you because I want you to use Skype every time after that. And every time somebody else joined Skype, it became more valuable. So that's a communication network effect. You can have, we'll go over this in a second, but you can have a marketplace effect. Okay, that is like GetJar maybe, or like eBay. It's where you have buyers and sellers that are joining together, and it's the liquidity that creates the long-term advantage. Even if somebody replicated eBay today, no one would join eBay because their buyers and sellers are all on eBay. Okay. Or you can have a network effect that's driven by third parties building on top of your platform with APIs or service calls. This is why there's a huge movement towards people opening up their platforms and having third parties build on top of them. Because even if you replicate the core platform, all the developers are already developing on the APIs of something else. So think about those network effects. The reason why there's exponential value in networks is because of either Metcalfe's law or Reed's law. Metcalfe's law suggests that the value of the network grows with the square of the nodes. It's like Skype. Every time there's an incremental user that joins Skype, there's more permutations of different calls that can be made. If there's just 2 people on Skype, I can only make 2 calls, or 1 call. If I had added a third person, there's suddenly 3. And it grows exponentially as you add each additional person. And Reed's law, which is another type of law, talks about how the value of a network is in the value of the subgroups, and it grows even quicker than Metcalfe's law. So think about those types of network effects. And so I have here Apple and eBay, and all these guys have phenomenal, deep network effects. So that, and I apologize, this presentation is basically done. Okay, so that is what I wanted to leave you. Because this is Lithuania, we need to shoot big, all right? So you guys are going to all work incredibly hard, and it doesn't take more effort to go from 1 million to 1 billion. I just want you to shift the architecture just a little bit, and suddenly a few shifts, and you're not doing anything differently, can create profound organic differences. And it is my wish and my hope that one day you guys will be coming to Silicon Valley to teach us how to change how we should do disruption. If you want anything more about accelerators, you can check out Alchemist. If anybody's doing an enterprise startup, please apply to Alchemist. And you can talk to Damien or anybody else. And we can talk if you guys need advice on accelerators. I'm happy to give that to you. My biggest piece of feedback for any accelerator is there's so many opportunities out there, but try to choose the ones that are the best. And the best way you'll know that is to talk to the founders that have gone through those programs. So make sure for venture capitalists or founders, or accelerators, talk to the founders that have gone through it. And then if you guys have any other questions, I'm here. Is that good? Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ravi. Yes, almost right there.